The silence of a house can weigh more than any storm. And sometimes, the cruelty of your own child strikes deeper than any heart attack. I was 65 years old the morning my life unraveled. A Tuesday, gray and heavy. The kind of day when the sky presses down and you feel it in your bones. My name is Thomas Whitaker, widower, father, retired accountant, living in a modest home on the north side of Dallas, Texas. I had a rhythm to my mornings. I always woke before sunrise, heated yesterday's coffee on the stove, and sat at the kitchen table where the blinds only half kept out the morning light. The neighborhood was quiet, interrupted only by the distant rumble of the DART buses and the barking of a dog down the block. After breakfast, I handled the small rituals of retirement, sorting mail, paying bills, keeping the ledger of my life tidy. That morning, though, routine betrayed me. When I opened my bank account online, the numbers didn't make sense. $864 charged in 4 days. Bars I'd never been to. Boutiques that sold clothes too young for me to understand. Streaming services I'd never subscribed to. At first I thought, fraud. My card must have been hacked. I was already rehearsing the phone call to the bank when the truth slid into me like ice water. It wasn't fraud. It was my daughter, Rachel, 26 years old, my only child. She'd been living with me for nearly 3 years, ever since her breakup with her boyfriend and the job she lost at a hotel downtown. I had taken her back into this house, the same house her mother, my late wife, once filled with laughter and church hymns, hoping shelter would give her space to rebuild. Instead, it had become something else. I'd noticed her voice growing sharper with me. The sweet, "Daddy, I love you" from her college years had curdled into, "Why are you always so old-fashioned?" She treated the house less like a home and more like a waiting room, somewhere she could crash while life figured itself out. But $800. My heart stuttered when I thought of it. I called out, my voice trembling more than I intended. "Rachel, can you come here a minute?" She appeared in the doorway of the living room, her phone glowing in her hand, her hair pulled into a messy bun. The irritation in her face told me I'd interrupted something more important to her than me. "What now?" She sighed. I turned the laptop so she could see the list of transactions. "Do you know anything about this?" She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She just laughed. A short, dry sound. "So what? You've got money. You don't even use it. You act like you're gonna live forever." Those words stung sharper than the numbers on the screen. "Rachel," I said, my voice cracking, "it's not about the money. It's about respect. This is my life savings. Since your mother died, I've done everything to keep this house, to keep us afloat. I can't let you burn it away." Her eyes flashed with anger. She stepped closer, her voice climbing. "You don't get it, do you? I've wasted years here taking care of you, stuck in this house while my friends move on. Maybe I use your money because you've already stolen my time." Her words knocked the wind out of me. I stared at her, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders at the Dallas Zoo, the teenager I cheered for at high school volleyball games. And now here she was, spitting rage like a stranger. "You think I'm holding you back?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she snapped. Then, with a venom I didn't believe a daughter could possess, she said it. "I wish you'd just die already so I could have peace." Time stopped. The sentence didn't just wound, it detonated inside my chest. My breath turned shallow. My skin broke out in cold sweat, and I felt that tightening pain radiating across my ribs. I staggered, one hand clutching the edge of the dining table, the other pressed against my chest. "Rachel," I gasped, "please, something's wrong. I need help." But she didn't move. She grabbed her coat, rolled her eyes like I was inconveniencing her, and walked out. The slam of the door rattled the picture frames on the wall, and just like that, I was alone. The house, once our fortress, turned into a tomb. The pain grew sharper. My heart pounded like it wanted to escape. I thought of Susan, my wife, gone 5 years now from a sudden heart attack in that very living room. I thought of my brothers, scattered across states, and wondered if anyone would know if I collapsed right there on the floor. My phone slipped in my sweaty palm, but I managed to dial the only person I trusted left in this world, Frank Delgado, my neighbor since childhood. He was the kind of friend who never drifted, even when marriages, jobs, and relocations pulled everyone else apart. "Frank," I whispered when he answered, my voice a thread. "Come over, please. I don't feel right." "I'm on my way," he said instantly. No questions, no hesitation. Those minutes stretched into eternity. I sat against the wall, head lolling back, the television yammering nonsense I couldn't follow. My pulse felt irregular, as if the heart inside me had taken Rachel's words literally and decided maybe it was time to stop. I stared at the family photo above the mantel. Me, Susan, and little Rachel in her first communion dress. A frozen memory of innocence, and I wondered, if Susan had been here, would Rachel have turned out differently? The front door burst open. Frank rushed in, out of breath, his face twisted with alarm. "Jesus, Tom! What happened? Where's Rachel?" "She left," I muttered. My throat was dry. Said she didn't care if I died. I'll never forget the look on Frank's face. It was grief and fury combined, but he didn't waste time. He hauled me to my feet, draped my arm over his shoulder, and half carried me to his truck. "We're going to Baylor Hospital," he said, voice firm. "You're not dying in this house, not today." The ride blurred. Streetlights smeared across the windshield, the Dallas skyline glowing faintly in the distance. I kept drifting in and out, clutching at consciousness like a man holding onto the edge of a cliff. Frank kept talking to me, recounting childhood stories, begging me to keep my eyes open. By the time we reached the ER, I could barely move. Nurses rushed me inside, clipped wires to my chest, oxygen mask sealing over my mouth. A doctor barked instructions, confirming what I already knew. I was on the edge of a heart attack. Lying there, machines beeping around me, I realized something even more painful than my failing heart. All my years of sacrifice, all my efforts to raise my daughter with love, had ended in abandonment. Rachel wasn't there, but Frank was. And that, maybe, was the only truth that mattered anymore. That night, as they stabilized me, I stared at the hospital ceiling and replayed Rachel's words over and over. Each syllable tore another piece of me. But beneath the sorrow, a seed of resolve began to form. If I survived this, things would change. No more indulgence. No more begging for love from someone who wielded cruelty like a weapon. I would rebuild, even if it meant starting alone. If you're still with me, friend, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know which city holds your ears tonight. And if this story speaks to you, give it a like and subscribe so I can share the next chapters of my journey. There are more to come, and I promise they'll cut deep. The night after they admitted me felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Machines hummed beside me, the faint smell of disinfectant in the air, and all I had were my thoughts, heavy, restless, impossible to quiet. The doctor's name was Dr. Karen Mitchell, a brisk woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that left no room for negotiation. She told me my heart had shown signs of an oncoming infarction, that stress was gasoline on the fire, and that if I wanted to live long enough to see another birthday, I'd need to make changes. Serious changes. She didn't know the whole story, of course. How could she? To her, I was another man in a hospital gown, tethered to wires, heart monitor blinking like a warning light. But in my chest wasn't just clogged arteries. It was betrayal. When the nurses changed shifts, I could hear them whispering outside the room. Some patients had flowers. Some had children sitting anxiously in chairs. Some had spouses holding their hands. My chair sat empty. Not one call from Rachel. Not a text. Nothing. It was Frank who filled the space, walking in with the same steady presence he'd had since we were kids, throwing footballs down the alley. He came that first night with a Whataburger bag in hand, joking that hospital food was punishment enough without my condition adding to it. "They say I can't eat that," I told him, nodding toward the burger. "Then I'll eat it for you," he said, unwrapping it with a grin. "Point is, you're not sitting here alone." The smell of grease and onions almost made me laugh. Somehow, Frank always knew how to ground a situation. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw Susan, not as she was at the end, but younger, laughing in our kitchen, flour on her hands from baking biscuits on a Sunday morning. The memory stabbed me with longing. I had promised her once, on our wedding day in a small Dallas church, that I'd take care of Rachel no matter what. And now I wondered, had I kept that promise, or had I turned it into an anchor dragging me under? Frank leaned forward, his voice softer. "She'll come around, Tom. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she's your blood. She can't stay hard forever." I wanted to believe him, but the echo of Rachel's voice, "I wish you'd die already," was louder than any reassurance. The second day in the hospital was a cycle of pokes, tests, and long, empty hours. The nurse on morning duty, Lydia, was gentle, asking about my pain level as she adjusted the IV. I told her I was fine, even though fine felt like a lie lodged in my throat. She must have sensed it, because she paused, looked me in the eye, and said, "You know, sometimes what hurts isn't just the body. Sometimes it's heavier." I turned away before she could read too much. The truth was, the loneliness hurt more than the chest pain. I kept checking my phone on the table, waiting for a message from Rachel. Each time the screen lit up, it was just a bank notification or a scam call. Never her. At lunch, Dr. Mitchell returned. "You're stabilizing," she said, flipping through my chart. "If progress continues, we can discuss discharge in 48 hours. But stress is your enemy. Whatever conflict you're carrying, you need to put it down." Her words pierced me more than she knew. How do you put down your own child? That afternoon, Frank came back, holding 2 paperbacks he'd grabbed from a thrift store. One was a Western, the other a biography of Lincoln. "Figured you'd need something to pass the time," he said. "Thanks," I muttered. "Better than staring at the ceiling." He pulled a chair closer. "Tom, I don't want to pry, but what exactly happened between you two?" I hesitated. My throat tightened as I recounted the argument, the stolen money, the words she hurled at me. Saying them out loud made my chest ache worse than the IV needle. Frank's jaw clenched. "That girl doesn't know what she's saying. She's angry at life, not at you." "Doesn't make the words disappear," I said quietly. We sat in silence for a while, the beep of the monitor filling the gap. "You ever wonder," I asked, "if we failed them somehow? As fathers? Maybe if Susan had lived." "Don't do that," Frank cut in. "You gave her a home when she had nothing. You did what a father does. Don't twist it into guilt just because she's lost." His voice was firm, but I could see the pain in his eyes too. Frank had lost his own son in Iraq years ago. He knew what it was to live with absence. Night fell again, and with it came the dreams. I saw Rachel as a child, hair in pigtails, running through the backyard with a kite. I saw Susan clapping from the porch, her laughter ringing like bells. Then the dream warped. The kite string snapped, Rachel disappeared, and Susan faded into smoke. I woke with tears dampening the pillow. The nurse checked on me. My vitals were steady, but my spirit wasn't. Day 3, and still no word from Rachel. Frank told me he'd tried calling her, even sent a message saying I was in the hospital. Nothing. She was active on social media, posting selfies, jokes, and dinner plates, but not one acknowledgement that her father lay in a hospital bed, fighting for breath. I felt something inside me harden. A resolve. A wall where once there had only been open doors. If I survived this, I wasn't going back to the old way. I wasn't going to bankroll her self-destruction or beg her for kindness. The thought frightened me, but it also lit something in me. Dignity, maybe for the first time in years. That evening, Dr. Mitchell came with her final evaluation. "You're strong enough to go home tomorrow, Mr. Whitaker, but listen to me carefully. If you walk back into the same situation that brought you here, I'll see you in this bed again, or worse. You need boundaries, whatever that means for you." Her words weren't medical advice. They were a line drawn in the sand. After she left, Frank stayed late, sitting with me while the TV played muted reruns. "You're thinking about what comes next," he said. "Yeah," I admitted. "For the first time, I think I know. I can't let her treat me like this anymore. Not after this." Frank didn't say anything for a while. Then he reached over and gripped my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." And in that moment, the truth crystallized. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stay when everyone else walks out. The next morning, when they handed me my discharge papers, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because my heart was healed, but because I had finally understood the cost of silence. I walked out of Baylor Hospital with Frank at my side, clutching a folder of medical instructions in one hand and a quiet promise in the other. No more being the doormat. No more mistaking obligation for love. If Rachel wanted to walk away from me, then I would let her. But I would not let her destroy me. Not anymore. The morning I left Baylor Hospital, Dallas looked different. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. Frank's truck pulled up to the curb outside my house, the same little brick home Susan and I bought in 1983. The lawn was patchy, the paint on the shutters faded, but it was ours. My heart beat hard as we approached, not from the climb up the porch steps, but from the weight of what waited inside. The door creaked open. The smell of old coffee and stale perfume lingered, evidence of Rachel's late-night life. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, except colder. Maybe it was just me. Frank set my bag down and gave me that look, the one that said, "You're not alone. Don't forget it." "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands shook. "Yeah, it's time." Inside, the silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I sat in my recliner, the leather cracked from years of use. Across the room sat Rachel's things, purses tossed carelessly on the couch, shoes scattered by the door, an empty wine bottle on the coffee table. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank, though he was right there. "Remember what you promised yourself." I smiled faintly. He knew me well enough to know I might fold when it came to Rachel. The first hour was uneventful. I brewed coffee, tried to steady my breath. But around 11, the front door opened, and in came Rachel. She looked surprised to see me. "They already let you out?" Her tone wasn't relief. It was inconvenience. "Yes," I said flatly. "Doctor said I was stable enough to come home." She shrugged, dropped her bag on the floor. "Good. Saves me the trip to visit." The words sliced deep. I waited, just one sign of concern, one flicker of care. Nothing. "Rachel," I said quietly, "we need to talk." She rolled her eyes, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and flopped onto the couch like a queen on her throne. "If this is about money again, I already told you. You've got plenty. You hoard it like some old dragon." "No," I said, my voice firm. "This is about respect, about what you said to me the other morning." She sipped her soda, eyes on her phone. "I don't remember." I clenched my fists. "You told me you wished I would die." The silence was sharp. She didn't even look ashamed. "You're being dramatic," she muttered. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" Her face hardened. "You're always hovering, always criticizing, always making me feel like I'm not enough. Maybe I lashed out. So what?" I stared at her. This was my daughter, the baby Susan had cradled against her chest, the little girl who used to draw hearts on construction paper for Father's Day. And now, she sat across from me, dismissing my pain as though it were an overreaction. "Rachel," I said slowly, "I almost died." For a split second, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. But it vanished just as quickly. She shifted on the couch and shrugged. "You didn't, though. You're fine. Can we drop it?" And that was when I knew. The Rachel I longed for wasn't here anymore. Maybe she never would be again. "I can't live like this anymore," I said finally. My voice was steady now. "This house can't be a place where I'm disrespected and robbed." She narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to leave." Her laugh was sharp, cruel. "You're kidding. Where am I supposed to go? You can't just throw me out, Dad. I'm your daughter." "You made your choice when you wished me dead," I said, my chest tightening. But this time, not from illness, from resolve. Her face turned red. "You're unbelievable. After everything I've sacrificed." "What have you sacrificed, Rachel?" I cut in, my voice rising. "I paid the bills. I kept this house running. I've given you food, shelter, everything. And you stole from me. You abandoned me in a medical crisis. That's not sacrifice. That's cruelty." Her eyes darted, desperate, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I was angry. You don't know what it's like to be me, stuck here with no life." I swallowed hard. Maybe I don't. But I know what it's like to almost die alone because my own child couldn't stand to look at me. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, she grabbed her soda, slammed it down, and stormed off to her room. The door slammed so hard the walls shook. I sat in my chair, trembling. My heart monitor beeped faintly under my shirt, a reminder of how fragile I was. But I hadn't broken. For the first time, I had drawn a line. Frank came by that evening. I told him everything. He nodded, jaw tight. "You did what you had to do," he said. "I feel like a monster," I admitted. "You're not a monster. You're a man who deserves peace. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." His words settled in me like bricks forming a foundation. That night, as I lay in my bed, Susan's side still empty, cold, I listened to the muffled sounds of Rachel packing. I didn't stop her. I didn't beg. I just stared at the ceiling, letting the tears roll down. Because love is supposed to be unconditional. But dignity can't be optional. By morning, her room was empty. She left no note, just silence. I walked through the space, the smell of her perfume lingering, the walls bare where posters once hung. I sat on the edge of her bed and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. The grief was heavy, but beneath it, there was something else. Relief. And in that fragile balance, I realized my life was no longer about saving Rachel. It was about saving myself. The morning after Rachel left, the silence was almost unbearable. It wasn't the kind of silence you crave after a long day. It was the kind that makes you question if you're even alive at all. I woke at dawn, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, hitting the empty hallway outside her room. I didn't need to open the door. I already knew she was gone. The quiet told me. No music, no hairdryer, no clattering of high heels as she stomped to the kitchen. Her room was stripped bare. The closet doors were open, hangers swinging like skeletons. The bedspread, the one Susan had picked out years ago, was wrinkled and cold. She had left behind only an empty soda can on the windowsill, as if to remind me her absence wasn't an accident. It was a choice. I sat down on the mattress and buried my face in my hands. I expected to feel rage, but what came was something softer, heavier. Grief. The kind of grief you feel at a funeral, where the body is gone, but the weight of what was lingers. This wasn't just Rachel leaving the house. This was Rachel leaving me. I whispered her name out loud as though she might still hear it. "Rachel!" The silence answered. Frank came by mid-morning. He had 2 cups of coffee from the 7-Eleven down the street, hot and bitter the way I liked it. He stepped inside, glanced toward the empty hallway, and immediately knew. "She's gone?" I nodded. He handed me the coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry, Tom. I know that's not how you pictured it." I stared at the steam rising from the cup. When Susan was alive, I used to think the hardest day of my life was the day I buried her. But now, I'm not so sure. At least she didn't choose to leave me. Rachel did. Frank let the words sit. He didn't rush to fill the silence. That's what I appreciated about him. He knew when to talk and when to just be. After a while, he said, "You kept her afloat longer than anyone would have. You gave her everything you had. At some point, Tom, she has to learn to swim." "I know," I whispered. "Doesn't make it easier." "No," he agreed, "but it makes it necessary." The next days bled together. I tried to go through my routine, making breakfast, paying bills, watering the plants Susan used to love. But everything felt off-kilter. The house seemed too large, the walls too hollow. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for the sound of Rachel's footsteps, the slam of her bedroom door, even her voice raised in complaint. But it never came. I started writing in a notebook, something Dr. Mitchell had suggested as a way to manage stress. At first, I just listed facts: the date, my blood pressure readings, what I ate, but soon the words shifted into something else. Memories, regrets, letters I'd never send. One night, I wrote to Susan, "I'm sorry. I promised I'd protect her. I promised I'd keep her close. But I don't know how anymore. I feel like I've failed both of you." When I finished, my hands were shaking. But for the first time, I felt like maybe I was speaking to someone who understood. Frank didn't let me drown in solitude. He came by daily, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with stories about his grandkids, sometimes just to sit on the porch with me. We'd watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes up and down the street, their laughter carrying in the warm Texas air. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink, Frank said, You ever think about what comes next? Not just tomorrow, but really next. I shrugged. I can't think that far ahead. Feels like my life stopped when Susan died, and now it stopped again. He leaned back, stretching his legs. Maybe it's time to start it again. His words stuck with me long after he left. Sunday rolled around. Normally, Susan would have dragged me to church, insisting we sit in the same pew every week. Rachel used to come as a child, clutching her little Bible, singing hymns too loudly. After Susan's death, we drifted. Rachel stopped going first. Then I followed. That morning, though, something pulled me. I dressed in my best shirt, the one I hadn't worn since Susan's funeral, and drove to the old church. The building smelled the same, old wood and candle wax. The pastor gave me a kind nod, as though he knew I was carrying something heavy. I sat alone, surrounded by families. I listened to the choir sing Amazing Grace, and for the first time in years, I let the words sink into me. I once was lost, but now am found. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. When I got home, I walked straight to Rachel's old room. I opened the window to let the stale air out, stripped the sheets from the bed, and started cleaning. Not out of anger, out of survival. Every item I boxed up was a memory. Her volleyball trophies, old high school yearbooks, the stuffed bear she used to sleep with. I held each one, remembering the little girl she used to be before life hardened her. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also felt like reclaiming space. By evening, the room was bare except for the furniture. For the first time, the house felt like it belonged to me again. I stood in the doorway, hands on the frame, and whispered, "This is my home." And I meant it. That night, Frank stopped by again. He saw the cleaned-out room and nodded approvingly. "You're moving forward," he said. "I don't feel like it," I admitted. "Feels more like tearing down." "Sometimes you have to clear the weeds before the garden can grow," he said, patting my shoulder. I smiled weakly. Leave it to Frank to turn my pain into a proverb. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote again. This time not to Susan, not to Rachel, but to myself. You deserve peace. You deserve dignity. You can miss her and still protect yourself. These things don't cancel each other out. I read it over and over until the words sank in. For the first time since Rachel left, I fell asleep without tears. Grief lingers like smoke. It doesn't vanish the moment the fire goes out. It clings, it seeps into the walls, into your clothes, into your lungs. But if you leave the windows open long enough, fresh air eventually finds its way in. The weeks after Rachel's departure stretched and warped. Some mornings, I woke thinking she was still there, expecting to hear her slam the bathroom door or argue over the Wi-Fi. But the house remained stubbornly quiet, and I had to remind myself all over again. She was gone. The quiet was heavy at first. Then, little by little, it became breathable. Frank was my anchor. He'd show up unannounced, sometimes with fried chicken from Popeyes, sometimes with a stack of mail he'd picked up for me, sometimes just to sit on the porch swing with a beer in hand. He had a way of filling silence without smothering it. One afternoon, as cicadas buzzed in the trees and the Texas heat pressed against us, he said, "Tom, you ever think about what you're gonna do now? Not just survive, but live?" I laughed bitterly. At my age? I think that ship sailed years ago. Hell no, he said, shaking his head. You're not dead yet. Don't act like it. I wanted to argue, but the truth was, something inside me wanted to believe him. The first small change I made was in the kitchen. For years, I'd lived on leftovers and takeout, too tired or too lonely to bother cooking for one. Susan had been the chef of the house. She could turn a handful of pantry scraps into a feast. After she died, the pots and pans collected dust. But one Saturday morning, I pulled out an old recipe card Susan had written in her neat cursive, chicken and dumplings. I followed it step by step, fumbling like a rookie, nearly burning the roux, spilling flour across the counter. But when the steam rose from the pot and the smell filled the house, I almost cried. It was like Susan had walked back into the room, guiding my hands. I set 2 bowls on the table, even though it was just me. I bowed my head and whispered, "For you, Susan." The food didn't taste exactly like hers. It lacked her touch, but it was warm, comforting, human. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel abandoned. A few days later, Frank suggested we try something new together. "There's a senior center over in Richardson," he said. "They've got classes, painting, dancing, even swimming. We don't have to be old dogs who never learn tricks." I hesitated. Me? At a senior center? I pictured rooms full of gray-haired folks shuffling cards and complaining about Medicare. But Frank wouldn't let it go. "Come with me once," he urged. "If you hate it, we'll never go back." So I went. And to my surprise, it wasn't what I imagined. The building was bright, the rooms full of chatter and laughter. In one corner, a group of women painted canvases of Texas landscapes. In another, a handful of men argued over dominoes. There was even a line dancing class, boots stomping in rhythm to an old country tune. Frank dragged me into a writing workshop, of all things. At first, I felt ridiculous, sitting in a circle with strangers, each holding pens and notebooks. The instructor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, asked us to write a memory from childhood. I froze. My childhood had been plain, uneventful. But then, I remembered a summer afternoon in 1968, when Frank and I built a tree house in the pecan tree behind my parents' house. We nailed the boards crooked, the ladder nearly collapsed twice. But when we finally climbed up and looked out over the neighborhood, we felt like kings. I wrote it down, word by word, hand shaking. When I read it aloud, the group smiled, nodded, even laughed at the crooked ladder part. For the first time, my words didn't feel useless. They felt alive. After class, Mrs. Alvarez patted my shoulder. "You've got a voice, Mr. Whitaker. Don't waste it." Her words echoed in my chest the whole drive home. The days began to take on rhythm. Coffee in the morning, a walk around the block, cooking experiments in the kitchen, writing in the afternoons. Frank joined me for some of it, especially the cooking. He had a weakness for peach cobbler, and together we attempted Susan's recipe. We burned the first batch, but the second came out golden, sweet, and sticky. We ate it straight from the pan, laughing like schoolboys. It had been a long time since laughter felt natural. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights, the grief returned sharp as ever. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, hearing Rachel's voice echo. "I wish you'd die already." The memory gnawed at me, reopening the wound. One of those nights, I pulled out my notebook and wrote her a letter. Not to send, just to purge the words. "Rachel, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know if I failed you or if life hardened you in ways I couldn't stop. But I need you to know, I loved you. I still love you. But I won't let your anger be the death of me. If you ever find your way back, the door will be open. But until then, I have to protect what's left of me." When I finished, I closed the notebook, pressed it to my chest, and let the tears come. Weeks passed. Slowly, I noticed changes. I slept better. My blood pressure readings steadied. The house, once suffocating, started to feel like mine again. One evening, Frank and I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink low. He sipped his beer and said, "You know, Tom, I haven't seen you smile this much in years." "Maybe I'm learning how again," I admitted. He raised his bottle. "To second chances." We clinked bottles, the sound sharp and hopeful in the twilight. A few days later, as I walked through the grocery store, I passed the card aisle. Father's Day was coming up. Rows of cards with cartoon ties and fishing rods stared back at me. My chest tightened. I didn't expect a card from Rachel. Not this year, maybe not ever again. But instead of despair, I felt something different. Acceptance. I chose a blank card, bought it, and wrote a note inside. To myself, "Happy Father's Day. You did your best. That has to be enough." I propped it on the mantel beside the photo of Susan. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it was life again. And that was a start. There's a strange moment after loss when you realize you're still alive. It's not relief exactly. It's more like shock. A quiet astonishment that the world keeps moving when yours has stopped. I marked the calendar one morning and realized a month had passed since Rachel left. 30 days, and not one call, not one text, not even a knock at the door. At first, the silence was a wound. Then it became a scar. By the time the calendar flipped again, it had started to feel like space I could breathe in. Still, I thought about her. A father doesn't stop thinking about his child, even when that child cuts him open. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder where she was sleeping, if she had food, if she had anyone who gave a damn. And every time my chest clenched with worry, I reminded myself of the promise I made in the hospital. I could love her, but I wouldn't let her destroy me. Frank kept me busy. He signed us up for water aerobics at the rec center. The idea of me in swim trunks at 65 nearly sent me running, but he wouldn't take no. "You almost died on me, Tom," he said, wagging a finger. "Doctor said exercise. You're coming, like it or not." Cease. So there I was, standing in waist-deep water surrounded by retirees in floral swim caps, wondering how my life had turned into this. But you know what? It wasn't bad. The instructor, a peppy woman named Marlene, cranked classic rock through a speaker, and we marched, splashed, and stretched. My joints groaned at first, but after a week I realized I was sleeping better. My chest felt lighter. "See?" Frank teased, patting his belly. "We're practically athletes." "Speak for yourself," I muttered, though secretly I felt proud. The writing workshop became another anchor. Mrs. Alvarez had a gift for coaxing stories out of us, like she was drawing water from a well. Each week, she gave us prompts. Write about a secret you've kept. Write about the first time you felt safe. Write about a goodbye. When it came my turn, I wrote about Susan, about the night she died, reading in her chair, her book slipping from her hands, the silence after her last breath. I wrote about the way I screamed her name, the way Rachel clutched my arm, the way the world tilted and never straightened again. Reading it aloud left me shaking, but the group listened quietly. When I finished, a man across the circle wiped his eyes. "You're brave to put that down," Mrs. Alvarez said gently. "That's how healing begins." I walked out of class that night with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Writing the pain didn't erase it, but it loosened its grip. One evening after class, Frank and I stopped at a diner off Garland Road. Over chicken fried steak, he leaned in and said, "I heard something today. From Becca? You remember my niece who works at that credit union downtown?" I nodded. She said she saw Rachel. Said she was opening an account with her friend. Looked thinner, maybe tired, but alive. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Did she say anything about me? I asked quietly. Frank shook his head. No, but Becca said she looked like she was trying. Said she had work papers in her bag. I swallowed hard. Relief and sadness tangled in my chest. At least she wasn't on the street. At least she was working. But the fact that I had to hear it from Frank's niece instead of my own daughter cut deep. She'll figure it out, Frank said. Give her time. Time. It felt like that's all I had left, and all I was running out of. As summer crept in, I found myself opening windows, letting the warm air fill the house. I planted tomatoes in the backyard, something Susan had always wanted to try, but never had the chance. I could almost hear her voice coaching me. Not too deep, Tom. Give them room to breathe. I spent hours in the dirt, sweat dripping down my back, and for once I didn't mind. It felt like building something again. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Carter from 2 doors down waved when she saw me outside. Your garden's looking good, Mr. Whitaker. Her words startled me. For years, I'd lived in this neighborhood like a ghost. But now, slowly, I was becoming visible again. Frank and I took to walking the neighborhood in the evenings. The air was cooler then, cicadas humming in the trees, kids pedaling their bikes in wide loops. We talked about everything and nothing, old stories, news headlines, what we'd cook next week. One night, he stopped mid-stride. You know, Tom, I think Susan would be proud of you. I blinked at him. For what? For living, he said simply. For not curling up and quitting. For standing up to Rachel even though it damn near broke you. His words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. Sometimes I think she'd be ashamed, I admitted, for not holding the family together. Frank shook his head firmly. No, she'd be grateful. Because you're still here. The loneliness still came, especially at night. Sometimes I'd walk past Rachel's empty room and feel a pang so sharp I had to sit down. I missed the girl she used to be, the one who drew me cards, who ran across soccer fields waving proudly when she saw me in the stands. But I also knew I couldn't live chained to the ghost of who she once was. So I wrote. I cooked. I planted. I swam. I let Frank drag me into the world even when I resisted. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the house stopped feeling like a coffin. It started to feel like a home again. One evening, I sat on the porch alone, the notebook on my lap. I wrote a single sentence in big, shaky letters. I am not done yet. I underlined it twice. The sun dipped below the horizon, the sky a deep purple. For the first time since Susan's death, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Sometimes healing feels like watching grass grow. You don't notice it day by day, but then you look back, and what was once bare ground is covered in green. That's how the summer of my 65th year unfolded. Quietly, stubbornly, life returning where I thought it never would. By July, the house didn't echo anymore. Not because Rachel had returned, she hadn't, but because I had filled it. With cooking smells, with stacks of notebooks, with the low hum of music drifting from the radio. Most evenings, I sat at the kitchen table scribbling stories for Mrs. Alvarez's workshop. She had us write about turning points, about the moment everything changed. For most, it was graduations, weddings, or careers. For me, it was that Tuesday morning when Rachel looked me in the eye and wished me dead. I wrote it all. The bank statement, the argument, the pain in my chest, the look on her face. When I finished, my hand was trembling. I wasn't sure if I could read it out loud to the group, but when my turn came, I took a deep breath and let the words spill into the room. The silence afterward was thick. Then Mrs. Alvarez spoke. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly, "you just gave us more than a story. You gave us your heart. Thank you." One of the women in the group, a petite lady named Doris, reached across and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. I walked out into the Texas night, cicadas buzzing, tears pricking my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. Frank and I kept up our routine, swimming, cooking, walking. We joked we were turning into two old widowers on the loose, though our wildest nights were usually spent eating barbecue at Sonny Bryan's and arguing about football. One evening, over brisket and sweet tea, Frank said, "You ever thought about getting out of Dallas for a bit? Just a trip. Doesn't have to be far." I hesitated. Travel felt like something for other people, not me. But Frank's eyes sparkled. "Come on, Tom. Life's short. Let's go see something." The idea scared me, but it also stirred something. "Maybe," I said finally. "Maybe." A week later, as I watered the tomatoes in the backyard, my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands and glanced at the screen. It was a text from Rachel. 2 words. "I'm okay." That was all. No greeting, no explanation, no apology. Just those 2 words. My knees nearly buckled. I sat down hard on the porch step, staring at the glowing screen. I typed and erased a dozen responses. "I'm glad." "Where are you? Do you need anything? Can we talk?" In the end, I didn't send any of them. I just whispered to the evening air, "Thank you, God," and let the tears fall. She was alive. She was okay. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, phone clutched in my hand. I didn't know if she'd ever text again, but for the first time since she walked out, I had proof that she hadn't vanished from the world. The next day at the writing workshop, Mrs. Alvarez gave us a new prompt. "Write a letter you'll never send." I didn't hesitate. "Rachel, I got your text. I'm okay." 2 words. But they're the best words I've read in years. I don't need you to explain. I don't need you to apologize. I just needed to know you were still out there, still breathing. You may never read this, but if you do, know this. I'm okay too. And maybe someday, when we're both ready, we can be okay together. When I read it aloud, my voice cracked. But instead of pity, the group gave me quiet respect. One man nodded, eyes wet. Doris dabbed her cheeks with a tissue. After class, Mrs. Alvarez pulled me aside. "Mr. Whitaker, you have more strength than you realize. Keep writing. It's your bridge." Frank was thrilled when I told him about the text. "See," he said, clapping my back. "She hasn't forgotten you." "Doesn't mean she wants me back in her life," I said cautiously. "No," he admitted, "but it means the door isn't locked." Those words settled into me like seeds. Maybe nothing would grow, but maybe something could. Summer bled into August, hot and relentless. The tomatoes ripened, fat and red on the vines. I picked them one by one, lined them on the counter, and thought of Susan. She would have laughed at me for finally gardening after decades of excuses. That night, I made tomato soup from scratch. Frank came over, slurping loudly. "Damn, Tom," he said, "you're turning into a chef." "Don't let it go to your head," I said, hiding a smile. But inside, I felt a flicker of pride. The house smelled alive again. One Sunday morning, I returned to church. This time, I didn't sit in the back. I sat in the middle, surrounded by strangers. The hymns rose, and though my voice cracked, I sang. Afterward, The pastor shook my hand. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mr. Whitaker. Glad you're here." I nodded, heart swelling. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote just one line. She said, "She's okay." And so am I. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was enough to keep me going. Hope is a fragile thing. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in quietly, like light through a cracked door. After Rachel's text, I started living as though the door might not be closed forever. Weeks passed, and no more messages came. Just that one. I'm okay. But that single line kept replaying in my mind. I'd see it when I watered the tomatoes, when I stirred soup, when I drifted off to sleep. I didn't know if she meant it for me or just for herself, but either way, it mattered. Still, I couldn't put my life on hold, waiting. Frank pushed me further into the world. "You can't just orbit around me forever," he said one night as we sat in lawn chairs watching kids light sparklers on the 4th of July. "You need more people, more places. Hell, maybe even a hobby that doesn't involve food or notebooks." I chuckled. "And what would you suggest? Ballroom dancing?" "Why not?" He grinned. "Couldn't hurt to learn a two-step." I laughed him off, but his words stuck. A week later, I found myself at the senior center again. This time, in a beginner's painting class. The room smelled of acrylics and canvas, and a dozen of us sat at easels staring at a bowl of fruit. My hand trembled with the brush. I hadn't painted since grade school, and my apple looked more like a lopsided pumpkin. But when Mrs. Alvarez stopped by, yes, the same Alvarez who ran the writing workshop, she smiled warmly. "Not bad, Mr. Whitaker. You captured the shape. Now, capture how it makes you feel." I frowned. "It's an apple." She laughed softly. "Exactly. What does that apple remind you of? A lunchbox from school? A pie your wife used to bake? Don't just paint what you see. Paint what you remember." Her words unlocked something. My strokes changed. The apple became Susan's apple pie, golden and steaming. My hand steadied as the memory filled me. By the end of class, my painting was still crooked, but it was mine. And for the first time, I realized art wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Slowly, my circle widened. I met George, a retired mechanic who cursed more than he breathed, but had a heart of gold. I met Linda, a widow who grew orchids and insisted on teaching me how not to kill them. I even joined a weekly dominoes game at the center, where I lost every round but laughed harder than I had in years. Frank teased me. "Look at you, Mr. Social Butterfly." But I could see the pride in his eyes. One evening, Linda invited a group of us to her house for dinner. I almost said no. The thought of being around strangers in someone else's home terrified me. But I forced myself to go. Her house smelled of garlic and roasted chicken. The table crowded with mismatched plates. People talked over each other, passed bread, laughed loudly. At first, I felt out of place, stiff in my chair. Then George slapped my back and said, "Tell us about that treehouse you built as a kid with Frank. He mentioned it once." So, I told the story. The crooked boards, the ladder that nearly killed us, the way we felt like kings surveying our tiny Dallas neighborhood. The room roared with laughter, and suddenly, I wasn't the outsider. I was part of something. Driving home that night, I realized my chest didn't ache. My loneliness hadn't vanished, but it had loosened its grip. Still, Rachel lingered in the background. I checked my phone too often, hoping for another message. None came. Then, one afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store. As I pushed my cart past the dairy aisle, I froze. There she was, Rachel. She stood a few yards away, scanning the yogurt shelves, hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She looked thinner, older somehow, shadows under her eyes. My heart thundered. I wanted to rush over, to grab her, to say, "Baby, I missed you so much." But I didn't. I just watched. After a moment, she turned, her eyes brushing mine. Recognition flickered, then hesitation. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, before turning back to her cart. I stood rooted, paralyzed, my throat locked. Words failed me. By the time I gathered courage, she was gone. Out the automatic doors, vanishing into the summer sun. I stood there in the dairy aisle, surrounded by strangers, clutching my cart like a lifeline. My legs shook, tears threatening. She had seen me, and for a split second, she hadn't turned away. That night, I told Frank, "You should have gone to her," he said gently. "I couldn't," I admitted. "Not like that. Not in a grocery store. Not when I didn't even know what to say." He sighed, but his eyes softened. "Tom, maybe that was her way of saying, 'Not yet, but someday.'" Maybe he was right. I opened my notebook and wrote, "I saw her today. She saw me too." That's enough for now. Life went on. More writing workshops, more painting classes, more dominoes. I even bought a little orchid from Linda, though I was sure it would die in a week. It didn't. It bloomed. And so did I, in small, stubborn ways. Some moments replay in your mind like a looped film reel. No matter how much you want to hit stop, the frame keeps flickering. The look in her eyes, the half nod, the silence where words should have been. The night after I saw Rachel at the grocery store, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, each turn whispering the same question. Why didn't I speak? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there by the yogurt, thinner than before, older somehow. She hadn't run. She hadn't looked through me. She'd nodded. That tiny acknowledgement was enough to keep me awake until dawn. By morning, my reflection in the bathroom mirror was haggard. "You're 65, not 16, I muttered at myself. "Grow a backbone." Oh, but it wasn't about backbone. It was about fear. Fear that if I opened my mouth, she'd shut me down. Fear that her silence would confirm my worst nightmare, that I was no longer her father in her eyes. Frank noticed immediately when he came by that afternoon. "You look like hell," he said, dropping a bag of groceries on my counter. "Didn't sleep." "Still thinking about Rachel?" I nodded. He sighed, pulled out 2 beers, and sat across from me. "Listen, Tom, you don't get do-overs in life, but you do get second chances. Next time, if there's a next time, you've got to take it." I froze, I admitted. I don't even know if she wanted me to say anything. Frank leaned forward. "Doesn't matter. You wanted to. That's what counts." His words stuck like burrs. At the next writing workshop, Mrs. Alvarez gave us the prompt. "Write about the thing you wish you'd said." My pen flew across the page. "Rachel, I saw you. I wanted to tell you I love you. That I'm sorry for everything I did wrong. That I'm proud of the girl you once were and the woman you're still trying to be. That no matter how far you go, you'll always be my daughter." But the words caught in my throat. So I'll write them here, and maybe someday you'll hear them anyway. When I read it aloud, my voice cracked. Doris reached over and squeezed my hand again. George muttered something like, "Damn, that's heavy." wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. I walked out into the Dallas evening, notebook pressed against my chest, the cicadas screaming in the heat. For once, I didn't feel completely alone in my pain. Meanwhile, my life kept filling in ways I hadn't expected. Linda's orchid continued to bloom, despite my bumbling care. George invited me to help him tune up his old Chevy, and though my hands were clumsy with the tools, the grease under my nails made me feel useful again. At church, the pastor asked if I'd consider sharing a testimony. Me? Standing in front of a crowd? The thought terrified me. But when the day came, I stood at the pulpit, heart pounding, and told the truth. I almost lost my life to grief, to stress, to silence, but I'm still here because of friends who didn't let me quit, and because hope has a way of finding us, even when it's just 2 words on a screen. I'm okay. The congregation fell quiet. Some nodded. Some cried. I walked back to my pew, shaking, but lighter than I'd felt in years. Still, Rachel haunted me. One night, I dreamed of her as a child. She was running through our backyard with a kite, Susan clapping from the porch. The string snapped, the kite flew away, and Rachel looked back at me with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, why'd you let go?" I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing. I sat on the edge of my bed, head in my hands, whispering, "I didn't mean to, baby. I never meant to." The next week, Frank convinced me to join him at a local community barbecue. Good food, good people, he promised. He was right. Kids ran wild with face paint, smoke from the grills curled into the air, and the sound of blues music poured from a live band under a tent. I laughed more that afternoon than I had in years, especially when Frank tried to dance with a woman half his age and nearly tripped over his own boots. As the sun set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, I realized something. I was part of life again, not watching from the sidelines, not hiding in grief, living. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. "If she never comes back, I'll still keep going." The words scared me, but they also freed me. Because love doesn't mean losing yourself. A week later, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. This time, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, breath caught in my throat. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. This was it. The moment I'd dreamed of, feared, prayed for. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, staring at the glowing letters, heart hammering like it was trying to break free from my chest. Then, slowly, I typed back, "Yes." There are moments when time slows, when the world tilts, and you know nothing will ever be the same again. Rachel's text, "Can we talk?" was one of those moments. I must have stared at that message for an hour before I answered. My thumbs hovered, my heart pounded, sweat dampened my shirt. Finally, I typed just one word. "Yes." Then, I set the phone down like it was made of glass and walked the length of the house, back and forth, waiting for it to buzz again. Minutes passed. Nothing. I went to bed restless, woke before dawn, checked my phone. Still nothing. The silence gnawed. By noon the next day, the screen lit up. Tomorrow. Coffee. Noon. Café Brazil. Lower Greenville. I read it 10 times. Then I read it again, just to be sure I hadn't dreamed it. Rachel wanted to meet. The next 24 hours were a storm inside me. Part of me wanted to jump into the truck and drive to her immediately. Another part wanted to hide, to protect what was left of me from whatever she might say. Frank came over that night, sensing my nerves. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Feels like Judgment Day. I muttered. You've faced worse, he reminded me. Hell, you've faced death. This is your daughter. Go. Listen. That's all you have to do. I nodded, though sleep still evaded me. All night, I rehearsed possible outcomes in my head. She'd scream at me. She'd apologize. She'd ignore me. She'd hug me. Over and over, my mind spun the wheel. By morning, I was exhausted, but steady. I showered, shaved, put on a clean shirt. When I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "Whatever happens, you'll be okay." And for once, I believed it. Café Brazil was busy, filled with college kids tapping laptops and families lingering over pancakes. The air smelled of coffee beans and cinnamon. I got there 20 minutes early, sat at a corner table, hands clasped so tight my knuckles turned white. At exactly noon, she walked in. Rachel. Her hair was longer than before, her frame thinner, her eyes older. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, and she looked, God help me, like the same girl who used to sit on Susan's lap with syrup on her cheeks after Sunday breakfast. She saw me immediately. No hesitation. She walked over, slid into the seat across from me, and for a long moment, we just stared. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. My throat closed. I managed a shaky, "Hi, sweetheart." The waiter came. We ordered coffee we didn't touch. The silence stretched. Finally, she spoke. "I shouldn't have said what I said. That day, I was angry. I was cruel. I didn't mean—" She trailed off, tears in her eyes. "I didn't mean I wanted you dead." I swallowed hard. "But you said it," she nodded, shame washing over her face. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Tears burned my eyes. "Rachel, do you know what that did to me? I ended up in the hospital. I thought—" My voice broke. "I thought I was dying, and you left me there." She flinched. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I was so lost, Dad. Drinking too much, spending too much, trying to numb everything. I thought you were holding me back, when really—" She wiped her face with a napkin. "Really, you were the only one still holding me up." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to let my rage loose. But seeing her crumble, hearing her voice crack, something inside me softened. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I don't need perfect. I just needed my daughter." She reached across the table with trembling hands. For a moment, I froze. Then I placed my hand over hers. We sat like that, two broken people trying to find each other in the wreckage. "I've been working," she said after a while. "Got a job at a diner. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I'm paying my own rent. No more stealing. No more lying." Pride swelled in my chest, cautious but real. "That's good, baby. That's real good." She gave a small, shaky smile. "I'm trying, Dad. I really am." I squeezed her hand. That's all I ever wanted. We talked for an hour. Not about everything. Some wounds were too raw to press, but enough. She told me about her apartment, her co-workers, how she still missed her mom every day. I told her about the tomatoes, the writing workshop, Frank's ridiculous water aerobics classes. For the first time in years, we weren't enemies. We were just father and daughter. When she stood to leave, she hugged me. Tight. Desperate. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my shoulder. "I know," I said. "I love you." "I love you too." She pulled away, eyes wet but steady. "Can we try again? Not move back in, just try?" I nodded, voice thick. "We can try." After she left, I sat there long after my coffee went cold, staring at the empty chair where she'd been. My heart was still fragile, scarred, but it was beating strong. Stronger than it had in years. I walked out into the Texas sun, the world brighter than before, and knew one thing for certain. Life wasn't over. It was just beginning again. That evening, Frank showed up on my porch with 2 beers. "Well?" he asked. "She came," I said, smiling through tears. "She came." We clinked bottles, the sound sharp and sweet in the fading light. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living.